World Read Aloud Day is celebrated on February 3, and we thought it was an excellent opportunity to highlight the work of the Psychoeducational Diagnostic and Intervention Clinic at the School of Education, UWI. And we are joined by reading interventionist Dr. Sabrina McMillan-Solomon and lecturer and reading specialist Dr. Paulson Skerrit. And we're going to be hearing Dr. Skerrit speak a little more using words from his mouth at this point in time, because you know many times we see him using sign language. So we start with you, please, Doctor, Dr. Skerrit, while we're welcoming both of you. And with regard to World Reading Aloud Day, I mean, I freely admit my bias, but what is the utility or the value of reading aloud? Because I looked at an article that you wrote for the day.
So reading aloud allows for promoting literacy and generating that love of books. There are a lot of readers who are what we call illiterate, don't have an interest in reading. And then reading, you can really best teach reading by providing good models. It's necessary to have explicit instruction, clear instruction that's systematic. You don't take anything for granted, but students can learn a lot from hearing someone read aloud, like those elements of fluency, reading with conversation, getting the learner to just sit back and visualize and get the gestalt of text. They could fully understand a lot of the deep meanings of that text. So it allows a reader to be brought into the world of the author, the lived experiences of the characters. And if you're talking about maybe content like science or social studies, history, to actually get into the discourse and understand the intricacies of what is being said. So it allows to draw people in and develop their love of reading.
I like the fact that you spoke about spoken reading or reading aloud. And there is that difference, because one of the things that I've found is that my brain can help fill some gaps in terms of understanding and comprehension. But when I read aloud, I realize, okay, well, it forces me to engage with the material a little differently. And that leads to, I guess, better understanding and a little more retention. Is that something that you find as well?
You're absolutely right. So when you read aloud, you get an opportunity to sometimes take on the persona of those characters. So it means that everything that's being said, there has to be a level of comprehension where you can actually feel what is happening with the characters. So there's a very strong connection between fluency that happens when we both read silently, but particularly when reading aloud, and your level of comprehension. So you're absolutely right. And then when we read aloud for others, we get a chance to convey our own understanding of the materials through those prosodic features like adjusting our tone, the feeling, adjusting our expression, and we convey some of that, raising our pitch, varying our volume. Those things are passed on to the reader.
And this actually reminds me of something that a lecturer in literatures used to talk about, because she also deals in theater, and she would talk about bringing something from the page to the stage and giving it and it getting a life of its own. But Dr. Solomon, let me pull you in, please. And I'm very interested to understand what you mean when you say a reading interventionist, because that carries me all over the place. But I also want you to kind of explain that in the context of World Reading Aloud Day. Thank you.
All right. Now, a reading interventionist, what we do is that we develop individual plans in order to move a reader from point A to point B. It don't have to be a struggling reader. It could be someone who just wants to improve their reading ability. And the different, as Dr. Skerrit talked about, those different tones, different things, different understanding, different levels of comprehension. And what read alouds to me, what I use within my service is to promote and motivate students. It helps them to demonstrate, they get an opportunity to be able to see and listen, because some read alouds, you can watch a video where someone is demonstrating it, and you can also listen and you're hearing how they change their tone. And students who struggle with reading, when they listen to read aloud, they don't have to actually engage with the challenges that they may have. in terms of word recognition, in terms of phonics, trying to decode that language. So all they have to do is focus on listening, and they can engage all of their attention and their cognitive skills on the comprehension and being involved in that reading and getting into understanding that story.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Skerrit, in that article, you also described the reading aloud as one, a responsibility, and two, a present that you can give to someone. What did you mean by that?
So I think the primary gift we can give someone is a gift of language. And that's why one of the challenges we have in Trinidad and Tobago is we use a restricted code when we talk. We don't engage in a lot of grand conversations with our children. And language, oral language, leads to literacy. So when we give that gift of language, we're promoting the development of reading, because a child first has to develop his oral skills. So oracy, your understanding of how the sounds of English works. And then you have to map that onto this abstract code. We call that the alphabetic principle. You have to figure out that these abstract characters of the English language have to map onto these sounds, and those characters can make different sounds depending on where they are. So when a child develops the ability to read, it's a gift for them, because that's their access to not just the experiences of so many characters that can teach us, but also to information that we need to critically think about to solve some of the world's wicked problems. So it's a responsibility, because teachers need to do that. They need to recognize their responsibility for oral language and for all the aspects of language arts and how they promote the development of literacy skills, reading, speaking, writing, visually representing, listening. Teachers have to draw on all of those to help students develop their skills in literacy. And this, I'm not just saying reading. In the past, we used to just talk about reading, almost as if it's something taught in isolation, a skill developed in isolation. But literacy, there are new dimensions to literacy. We're in a digital world now, and you have digital literacies. You have multiple literacies. You have new literacies. And so there are new ways of reading. People read differently, and there are new sets of skills. So when we pass that on, we owe it to our students to do that. So we have a responsibility, and it's a gift, because we are giving them something that can make them independent learners.
And I love what I'm hearing from you, Dr. Skerrit, and I want to include both you and Dr. Solomon. I don't know who will answer first, because looking at the logo for PEDIC, you see that I actually forms a key. And you spoke of access a little while earlier, and that literacy, as you explain it, can help unlock so much potential within the life of an individual. But when we talk about literacy, and I'm very happy that you raised the fact that there are different types of literacy, how do we ascribe value? Because people may say, okay, well, this type of literacy is worth more than this. So this is all I want you to focus on at this point in time, not necessarily making a rounded or holistic individual. So you're on, so I'll start with you. Thanks, Dr. Skerrit, but I'll ask the same question to Dr. Solomon after. Thank you.
Yes, so you're absolutely right. In the past, people had their limited views of what might be a more important aspect of literacy. For example, if a young child was reading a comic book, some parents and teachers would reprimand that child. But comic books are a genre of text that is amazing, that supports visualizing and reading between the lines, making inferences and making predictions. But one of the things that we need to do to provide access for, or this key for readers, is to assess them. And that's one of the things we do at PEDIC. So it's called the Psychoeducational, Diagnostic, and Intervention Clinic. And we do, in addition to a range of psychoeducational assessments that look like things like intelligence tests, reading achievement, adaptive skills, and a number of other issues, behavioral challenges of students, we do reading assessments. They're standardized reading assessments, and they allow us to identify what might be the specific problem that a child is having with reading. Because reading, there's a term people seem to be associating me with, is a complex linguistic achievement. And a lot of times teachers and parents think, but why is this child struggling with reading? I learned to read so easy. Reading is a difficult task, very complex, because there are a number of important pillars that you need to get right to read. And you may get one, a child might be able to decode. You heard Dr. Solomon use that term earlier. They might be able to look at these characters and figure out their sounds and put them all together. But then are they visualizing? Is anything happening in here that's allowing them to make sense? Are they seeing color? Are they seeing perspective? Are they seeing the size? When they read about a description of a character, what's happening in here? Can I ask you, what did you picture for this? Can you tell me that? There's comprehension, there's vocabulary. And in English, words don't play fair. We have multiple meaning words. So words are polysemous in nature. A word can mean a different thing given the context. So sometimes students need they need assessment, diagnosis, and then, as Dr. Solomon will add, they need very specific interventions based on evidence. We know this works to help these students access those skills that they might be struggling with.
And we want to start with some of those interventions with Dr. Solomon. When we return, we are speaking about World Reading Aloud Day, as well as the work of the PEDIC. So we speak more on that when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with Dr. Paulson Skerrit as well as Dr. Sabrina Solomon about reading the work of the PEDIC, the School of the Psychoeducational, Diagnostic and Intervention Clinic. And Dr. Solomon, we were asking about ascribing different values to different types of literacies. So I'll get your view on that before we start to dive into some of the interventions, which I'm also very excited to hear about. Thank you.
Value you're talking about is it a value that you think an individual will put based on the type of literacy, as Dr. Skerrit talked about, comics, novels, fiction, non-fiction texts. But in terms of, so people may ascribe different values to different things, but they may also be interested in different things, as well as some of those different literacies have different purposes, and it will be used in that context. It depends on what context you're using, promoting that particular literacy, the context you're using it in, where you are, what is needed at that point in time as well. That will determine what value is placed on any particular, as Dr. Skerrit talked about, the different types of literacies. And I will just connect it to intervention as well. Okay. For instance, if there's a child when we assess a child and we look at the evidence, we looked at errors and look at their relative strengths and challenges. And then we'll develop a plan of how to move this student forward in terms of their development of their literacy skills. And it may have a child and they may be motivated by a particular type of literacy. And you would try to include that into their intervention so that you are using their strengths to build their challenges, so that you are not just focusing on their challenges. And when you're doing this intervention, that child only feels that, they're struggling in this area and you're only going at that particular area. You have to use their strengths as well as things that will motivate them.
Now, I love the fact that you talk about being able to basically flex to suit a situation, because one of the things, I've said it already, I love the work of Paul Douglas, so I read it a lot with my children. One, because it's a little break from the amount of work using standard received English that they would during class time, but also it helps them to get more of a sense of self and realize that there is a place for other types of language, other types of literacy outside of the standard received English. But I'm wondering though, Dr. Solomon, what are some of those factors or triggers that you need to say, okay, well, I'm going to assess this person, and then even further than that, say, okay, well, we need to implement an intervention?
Right. The factors now, it can be within our clinic, a parent can bring a child in if they believe that the child has an issue in terms of their reading or their learning generally. If they think that the child is behind where they project that the child may be, as well as a school or teacher can recommend that they may say, this child needs additional assistance, or a recommendation in terms of seeing a special needs person. And those things that you may come to us and say you were referred, or you can just come in and say, you know, you heard about our clinic and you just wanted to improve the skills of your child or know where they are in terms, because our assessments are standardized internationally. So when we assess a child, we can mark that child and benchmark them in terms of their grade level, their age level, and where they should be in terms of learning skills. Both, well, if you access these psycho-educational skills, they would go into other areas other than reading, such as numeracy and their cognitive skill, IQ testing, and stuff like that.
And you're saying this, and I find it so interesting because it seems as though there's so many nuances that need to be taken into consideration. Like some people will fly through the first primer with the kind of washed out colors, and you just have those basic words. Some people need to be a little more visually stimulated to even want to learn the words, and they need that scaffolded kind of approach towards them building the literacy. But now we're seeing workshops that are on hand. So Dr. Skerrit, we want to bring you back in, please. One, in terms of who and how do we access the clinic? And two, why the need for the workshops?
So PEDIC, well, we have our email, so I can just give you that information. So the email address is pedic@sta.uwi.edu, or a person can call at 662-2002, extension 84511. And they can call and arrange to get a consultation where we can try and talk with the parents. So we'll interview the parent, probably interview the child. Then we decide what specific assessment needs to be done. And then we would work out an intervention plan and then offer our intervention services so the child would come in. But of course, interventions are not just for parents and children. We also provide workshops that provide training for teachers and parents. We need to close that link between what happens in school and out of school. And we saw how the pandemic thrust us into an urgent need to do that, where parents also need to be able to work with their children. And while highly qualified teachers of reading and literacy are still critical, we need parents to also be trained so they can work to support. And some of the professional development I've done with primary schools is where, when I'm training the teachers, we have the parents come in and both groups are getting that training. So the webinar that we had last week looked at reading loss due to extended school closure during our July-August vacation school closures. A long time students are away from school, and how lower income students are more affected by being out of school and not having the home resources to support their literacy development. And then we looked at extended school closure during the pandemic and its impact on reading loss, and some suggestions that could be used to kind of help students. The upcoming webinars, there's one on February 9th, and then another one in the month of March, where we'll be looking at word study. So that's one of the things that Dr. Solomon talked about. Students sometimes struggle with their word recognition skills. And so this workshop is going to focus on using word sorts, digital and paper-based word sorts, to help students understand and discover the patterns in words at the sound level, at the meaning level, and the within word patterns. And because that's critical for students to be able to develop their word recognition skills at the level of automaticity, where they can identify words and there's no cognitive strain when they read, where their time is spent focusing on what is this word, and now their attention can be used toward the comprehension and fluency.
And just before we wrap up, Dr. Solomon, the third session, which would be the 9th of March, I believe, effective parent-teacher talk, which is something that you would have spoken about already. But we want to thank you, Dr. Skerrit, as well as Dr. Solomon, so much, reminding you of the email address, PEDIC, PEDIC, @sta.uwi.edu for more information. And thank you for the work that you are doing. On behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Roster. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.